Hey guys, congratulations on getting this assignment done because I know it's an incredibly difficult thing to ask of you. Let's start with yours, Wilma. I'm really impressed with the sculpt that you've done. Because it's just a few days work. I can see you've put a lot of work into it. The main problem for me is not with the sculpting itself. It's the fact that, well, as you mentioned in your email, you've retopologized it or remeshed it a couple of times so that you've lost the original morph target. And what that means is that it's not a comparative anatomy study, it's just a sculpt of a horse. And I think it's worth focusing on this just for a minute because it's important that, like, when you have a brief, whether it's a homework brief or a brief from a client, which is ultimately what we want to be training ourselves to be able to deal with, is that you stay part of that brief even when it's difficult. And if it is difficult, you can stay part of it, but maybe you find a way that works for you to get around it. So, for example, what you could have done is go, it's too difficult for me to sculpt on this mesh that's all stretched out in places. I'm going to retopologize it, and then I'm going to project that sculpt onto the old version. Right, so you have your version that morphs, you sculpt on another one, and you project down. So the solution is there. You just have to think about it and not just go, well, this is difficult for me, so I'm going to do something else, because then it becomes another assignment, and it means that you're not hitting the brief. So anyway, I know that's got nothing to do with your sculpt, but I think it's a really important point to mention. With the sculpt itself, I'm really happy with this. I get the impression that the neck is maybe too stretched out, and maybe I would the way I kind of have internalized the rhythm of a horse head is that this is more like a C curve that pushes out here, and then here we have an S curve, and I just play those two ideas against each other in the same way that anytime when I have an arm or a leg or something like that, I see what is the outside rhythm, what is the inside rhythm, and how do I get those two to work together. Okay, so through here, this is just my instinct of what I would do, and I'm sure like the length of the neck is something that will vary quite considerably between species. And now that's too exaggerated, but I would rather have it too exaggerated than not enough. Okay, and the neck actually I think comes further forward into the head, so there's a little bit more integration there. And then as I've done that, your forms have got a bit wobbly. I generally just resculpt them rather than trying to hold on to them too much, which can be destructive. You don't want to get too attached to any of your forms, because you can always make them again. Okay, now there was one thing that when I was looking at the sculpt from the front view that I thought was worth mentioning, which is that the rhythm of the silhouette from the front is similar in your sculpt, is similar to a human head, in as much as you're really finding the fullness of the jaw and of the masseter muscle. And the masseter is a huge muscle in the horse, but it's very flat. And actually, what happens on a horse is that the jaw really tapers out. And it's the eyes that are, and I see you capturing this already, but the eyes are really bulging and really sticking out. The upper lid is going to be much further forward than the lower lid. That's the same thing that a human has, but potentially something like this. I'm just going to flatten that off a bit. So just reversing that rhythm. And if I take a look at this in flat color mode, like, there's not that much happening in the silhouette there, but it's really important that that silhouette makes sense for that animal and for that species. It's like we mentioned with the ears as well. Like, your ears are working fine, but it's going to be these small tiny things. But like a tiny change there is a huge change in the silhouette, because these things are just sticking out. If I do the same change through here, this is actually a bigger change that I've made, but no one's going to notice it. Whereas in the silhouette, bonk, it's going to affect everything straight away. And that's worth thinking about, just in terms of thinking about priority, because even if you had 3 months to work on this sculpt, you still couldn't do something that was 100% perfect. So then you have to choose, how do you prioritize? What is the most important thing? And then you hit those things first and then work back from there. And that should be the process, whether you're spending 10 minutes on something or 10 months on something. The same thing. Just go for the most important thing and then go back. And anything that impacts the silhouette directly is normally going to come up pretty high on the list of important things. Now, just something that I just noticed is you see the rhythm on the outside and inside of that, the tibia and fibula, feeling very, very similar. So that, you want to train yourself to be able to, when you spot those things, and of course, when you don't have much time, you'll miss some of these things. But hopefully, when I point it out, you can see like, oh yeah, something feels wrong through there, and then fixing it. Well, it doesn't really matter how you fix it, really, as long as you're aware of the problem. And this is the thing that I talk about a lot. Of like, I'm not so concerned about accuracy. I'm more concerned about seeing that you're really thinking about things. And so through here, this is both, right? But what I need you to be able to do, by both I mean it's both making it more accurate, and I'm thinking about it, right? I'm thinking about this muscular mass pushing on the outside, same as on the human, right? You think about this, the lower leg on a human, you have the muscular mass, the tibialis anterior, extensor digitorum, perineal group, calf group, all of that pushing onto the silhouette on the outside, and then through here, that pushes up against the bone of the tibia. So very, very similar idea, but now from a rhythmical point of view, we get this swing inwards, and then it comes out, and then it swings in again, and that plays against a more simple movement on the inside. Okay, the final thing that I want to mention here is just you see how you've got the hooves at the back and front are slightly different, and here they're not quite touching the floor, for example. And this is a small point, but it's a sort of thing that will, like, as soon as you have this nice and clean, and it actually looks like it's sitting on the floor, it will suddenly then just look like, so maybe I'll move this up. It'll look like you've cared about the sculpt, and that's really important, Hang on, I'm struggling to move this for some reason. There was a hidden mask on there. Okay, yeah, it's really important that it looks like you've cared about your sculpt, even when it's a fast thing. So just making sure that the feet are on the floor is a small thing, but it matters. And that's from a visual point of view, like how people will react to it, but it's also an important thing to develop from a production point of view. Like if you're handing a model off to a rigger and it looks like you haven't really cared about whether the feet are placed properly on the floor and stuff, then you're going to start to upset people. So some things to think about. But overall, like, really, really impressive sculpt. Okay, so let's take a look at yours. And actually, I think on yours and Lewis's, on both sculpts, we can look at how the spine kind of drops through the middle as the rib cage pulls it down. So that would be one rhythmical thing that I'd look for. In yours, in general, I think, like, what would be interesting and I think useful for your style overall is to practice doing sculpts where you're just working in a really simple, minimalist sort of way. Because this exciting way that you have of working, I think, is really going to work out well for you. But you've got to complement that with an ability to really find very delicate, very subtle forms. And naturally, you probably won't move towards that because naturally you find exciting and dynamic forms. So work to your weaknesses or work to the opposite of your skill set, if you want to look at it that way. But I think that's really going to pay off. So yeah, we can drop this movement through here, and then, like I was saying on Wilmot's, I would look for this just as a simple C curve that pushes out, and then you have the S curve moving on the inside. So here I'm playing like a really soft, delicate line against a more dynamic line, and finding the contrast of those two. In general, I think you can find just how crazy thin the bones will get. It's really quite unbelievable, considering how much weight is being carried, how thin these bones get in general. And again, I think, like, when your natural style is to build, then what you'll find is that your bones start to grow, and that then affects the rhythms, or it certainly affects the rhythms of areas like fingers, toes, and the lower legs of a quadruped, where the rhythms are dictated by the bone. So just looking to go, how thin can I go through there, and then through here, same idea. I was just playing on Wilmar Sculpt, and I'm just using the move brush here and just really thinking about the lines in terms of. I didn't store a morph target. That's annoying, but just allowing those lines to dance. I'm not just thinning them out. It's not. I am making the forms thinner, but at the same time, I'm tackling two problems. I'm going, how can I make them thinner, and keep on pushing the life, keep on pushing the movement. Okay, so let me store a morph target now. So yeah, the thing I was saying about just looking for simplicity is like, well, even to be honest, you could just go to your lowest level and delete higher and do something like this. And then go, okay, that's my main form, and then start to build up and look for the sharpness, look for the accents again, because smoothing anything out is nothing, or it's no way to work in terms of, you can't have that be your final mark, but you can use it to kind of, you could basically look at it like this, like your sculpt is a canvas, or the sculpt that you've done so far is a canvas, and then you use that to build the final sculpt, the final painting, if we're going to work with that metaphor on top of that. Because you won't need much, like through here, for example, same as on the human, you'd have serratus through there, find a few ribs. You don't need much if the big forms are working to suddenly start to bring areas to life. But what you'll probably find is that as you do this, you'll naturally go back to putting in so much information and so much detail, and so that, I think, is a really good thing for you to work. And this idea will work both for quadrupeds and for humans, and for anything the kind of organic that you're sculpting, and anything inorganic actually, because what it's going to allow you to do is to start studying the balance between chaos and nature more closely, and going, where can you have a lot of detail? Like there would be an example. Through here, there's going to be so much detail. And then through here, you can just let it go and let it be soft, and find that balance between them. And actually, like as I've done that, when I just sculpted out or smoothed out your forms, you're left with still these exciting movements, because you have so much of that excitement and that rhythm built into your sculpt already. I think generally that head would get thinner, and this is again, like when you have a style that naturally overbuilds, then you'll probably find that in general you're too wide on things. Like through here, the shoulder wants to be wider than the hips, so this can come in like a whole bunch. That maybe can get a bit wider, or the hips can maybe get a bit wider. But yeah, so when you're dealing with very, very narrow forms, that's not going to work out with your style so well, and you'll have to figure that out, Whereas if you're dealing with like a super bodybuilder type of physique, that's probably going to be more suited to your natural style. Okay, with yours, Lewis, I think from the side view, there's not anything that's jumping out as a huge problem. Like I mentioned, this just finding how that belly sort of falls in through there. And then through here, you see that's a very kind of gentle C curve maybe. And what I want you to look for is how much, on most quadrupeds, the hips are just pushing back there. So you get this little sharp jump out and bulge through there, something like that. And then compared to a human, the biceps femoris, and the muscles on the inside as well, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, just coming down much further past the joint, and that angle is feeling a little bit extreme, so I'm not sure whether we get more meat down here or less hip up there, or maybe a little bit of both. But I think that the main things that I would say are you can go more extreme on the head in terms of the length, but also the triangular nature of it. So for me, I've mentioned before, like look at the caricature. Look at, what is that big shape if I had to exaggerate it, and the horse head is like a wedge. So, if I'm getting it wrong one way, I want it to be like too much of a wedge, because if you have the opposite, then you end up with something that's too close to a human. So yeah, I think just stretch that guy out, thin it out, and then similar as what we were saying through with the other guys. Well, you've got the bulginess of the eyes working well, fairly well in terms of the bone, but you see how you have the eye still kind of buried in the socket, and that's a much more of a human movement. So on a prey animal, you have to push those forms out so that they can look in all directions, or have as large a field of vision as possible without having to turn their heads. So you can just kill this brow. Right? You don't want to have like a human sort of brow. You do want that diamond shape as well. So by thinning out a bunch of this, then I can start to work with that, and then there's going to be movement pushing out there, but it doesn't shield the eye itself. And then the masseter will be filled in through here, and the personality of that being flat. So again, this is just working with silhouette and just making sure that's on the money. Thinning this out, it's really shocking how thin a horse head will get. It'll flare out towards the nose, but so you kind of go thin and then you flare out, and it's maybe 1, 2, 3 planes through there, and then just the thick rubbery feeling of the lips. Okay, and then the biggest thing I think outside of the things that we've mentioned is just seeing if you can get those feet coming together, and remembering that from the front and back views of a quadruped, or certainly a digitigrade, an ungulate, certainly something that walks on the nails, is you get this oval shape. But you'll have it with digitigrades as well, for sure. The further the feet are away from the body, the more of this elegant move that you're going to get in towards the body, because the weight is not distributed on a very big area. So those movements really have to come underneath the body to support the weight. If you look at a plantigrade, like a bear or a rat, even something like that, where the weight is distributed right the way across the hand and the foot, essentially, those things can be further away from the body because you have a bigger surface area to carry that weight on. So, and as a result of that, you generally get less elegant movements, right? I don't think many people would say that a rat is as elegant as a horse or a bear even. Yeah, I just love this. I love the tracking this movement through. Yeah, and it looks anatomically like everything makes a lot of sense. Let's take a look from the top view. You've got the thinness there, the width there. That all makes sense. Yeah, very cool. And I think through here, you've got to move as well, right? So yeah, this was a smart way of working, I think, where you just started with one thing and then you froze it off. Because then if you did need to fulfill the brief completely of having, like, let's say a finished final sculpt that morphs from a human into that, then you can project onto this, or project this onto your final sculpt. Yeah, very cool. All right, guys. Well, let's leave it at that. But fantastic work, and thank you for putting in the time that it takes to do this. I'm really